I especially like when people come up to me and I sort of think, well, maybe they're my age close, and they say, oh my God, my mother breastfed me watching you.
I don't know if I can share that story. But so, as many of you know, you have been a huge staple in the Boston
Thank you.
local news.
Thank you.
And I guess if you could just kind of tell us all how it all started. Like, how did you get involved with the Boston news scene?
Well, I want to start by telling you that, excuse me 1 minute. Did it go off?
It did.
Did it? All right. I've seen the profile one too many times. You know what I mean? So I like to,
Okay, good.
all right, excuse us.
Thank you.
Don't mention it. I want to start by, can everybody hear me? First of all, that's my whole big thing. Yes, why, you want to see how tall I really am? And these are not the high shoes either, okay? I wanted to start by, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Maurice and I are dear friends. We have been for a long time. And when he first called and asked me about this, I thought he was simply calling and inviting me to dinner. And I said, yeah, I'd love to, sure. And then he told me about the program, and I was absolutely tickled to come. I think many of you know this. I'm from Natick. I'm a local girl. And Natick is Marlborough, It's the same thing, really, when you come right down to it. And any success that I have had in my life, in my career, I really attribute to my upbringing in Natick. People ask me all the time, how'd you get into the business? Where did you go to school? Where'd you go to college? You know what? All of that is important, certainly. But what is really important to me is that, I'm a Natick girl, home of the Redmond. Yes, I said Redmond. Some things will never change. And I like to say that I'm living proof there was a Natick before Doug Flutie. I went through the Natick school system. I graduated from Natick High School in the class of 67. 58. I'll save you the trouble. Let's just get it out there right now, okay? Well, you'd be doing the math. You'd be saying, well, she graduated and she was 18, so now it's anyway. And so that's what I really wanted to start by saying, that I'm just, I'm a local girl. And just recently, it's been very traumatic for me. I just moved out of Natick to Needham, which I refer to now as a suburb of Natick. But from very early on in my life, I had a big mouth. I guess really that was what it would come down to. I was always just really curious and interested in people and things. And it's funny because Christine and I spoke a little earlier. I was never a great student. I was never an honor roll student. I was, on the safety patrol and student council and on all those extracurricular things for a semester, and then I would flunk off. So my teachers, though, and I can't say enough about this. My teachers in Natick saw something in me, and they realized that I had an ad vocation. And so when it came time to go to college, they directed me toward Emerson, which is, as you know, a big communication school, big broadcasting school. And I have never had a broadcasting course. I've never had a speech. Well, we had speech. You had to take speech. But I never had a journalism course. And I went to Emerson for one big reason. They accepted me. Honest to God. It was the only school that I applied to. My teachers and my guidance counselors said, Emerson is a big communication school. You're a big communicator. Read that. And they said, you know what? So I went to Emerson and I majored in speech pathology and audiology for about 10 minutes. I couldn't even spell audiology, and but I liked the school, I liked the city, I liked the people, and I had a wonderful psychology professor who said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I like your courses. And he said, well, do you want to major in psychology? And I said, that would be great. So I am probably about the only graduate in the history of the college with a major in psychology and never having taken a broadcasting course. So what happened is that when I graduated from Emerson, I went up to New Hampshire. I moved to New Hampshire and to work on my master's and to get a job in social services. I got up to New Hampshire and discovered they had no social services. Still don't, as far as I can tell. But so I got a job selling radio advertising. And the management at the radio station, now this was back in the early 70s, mid 70s, the manager at the radio station thought, well, this will be sort of cool. Let's put a girl on the radio. They'll drive off the side of the road when they hear a girl do the news. And we laugh about it now, but truly that was the mentality back in 1973 or 4. And so that's how it started for me. And I just sort of loved it. But I didn't want to just read scripts that somebody else had written. So I started rewriting the scripts, and then I didn't want to just rewrite stories that other people had covered, and I started going out and covering the stories, and then I realized that I loved it. I loved having that kind of a responsibility to get information for people that they otherwise might not have access to. And so I ended up working at every radio station in Manchester, New Hampshire, and at the time there were 3, and that brought me to WBZ in Boston Radio, and from BZ Radio, my boss was leaving to go to WHDH Radio, and he brought me with him. And while I was at WHDH Radio, the news director at Channel 5 was a great guy. I met him out on a story, and he said, do you have any interest in doing some part-time work for us on the weekends? I said, sure. You know, I never really aspired to television. I loved radio. And as a matter of fact, when I first started in television, they used to tease me. They used to tell me I had not yet ready for prime time hair. which I still don't, actually. And I loved it. I loved the immediacy. I loved the ability to show people what you were talking about. And I started at Channel 5 in 1980, part-time. And in 1981, one of my last jobs, reporting jobs, one of my last assignments as a part-time reporter was the World Airways crash. And I'll tell you a little story that has not been widely reported that is always taken a piece of my heart. Bill Bratton was the deputy superintendent in the Boston Police Department at the time. And he's now, he left Boston, he went to New York, now he's out in Los Angeles, and is still very connected to Boston, as bless you, family members here. And he and I were great friends, and we were having lunch, and it was a day after, it was the Monday, the World Airways crash was on a Saturday afternoon, late afternoon, and he and I were having lunch in Boston, and his beeper went off. This was long before we had cell phones. And he said, oh, so I'll be right back, excuse me. And he walked to the payphone, and he came back, and he was ashen. And I said, what's the deal? He said, they found 2 bodies. No, they found 2 missing names, Walter and Leo Metcalf, whose bodies have never been found. They're missing, and nobody has any idea. And I said to him, excuse me. And I went to a payphone, and I called WHDH Radio, which is where I was working at the time, and I said, just put me on the air. And they said, well, what do you? I said, just put me on the air. And so they put that bulletin, Susan Wornick, and I was on the air within minutes. And people said to me, how did you ever get that story? And it was shortly after that I started working full-time for Channel 5. And so that was about a 10-minute answer to a very simple question. I mean, I can just keep going. I mean, obviously, I think everybody knows that about me by now. And at Channel 5, I started just doing general assignment reporting, and I would pretty much do anything that they wanted me to do, and loved all of it. Loved every single assignment that they gave me. As a matter of fact, it was really funny, because at first, many of you probably still remember this. I was the storm reporter. If the weather was bad, they'd say, send anyone. But if the weather was dangerous, they'd say, send Susan. And it would always be the same thing. Chet and Natalie, remember them? Yeah. Sitting there saying, good evening, everyone. It's the worst night of the year. State police say, don't go out. Driving is treacherous. Road conditions are hazardous. Stay at home. Susan Wornick is now live on the side of 128. And then there'd be that big screen behind them, and they'd turn around and they'd say, Susan, how is it? And I came this close to saying, swell, Nat, wish you were here with me, But I loved it. I really did love it. I got splashed and slobbered on and went home looking like hell many times. But I loved it. And then Paula Lyons, who I'm sure you all remember as a great consumer advocate in the city of Boston, worked at Channel 5 as our consumer reporter, and she got a job to go to ABC. She had that opportunity, so she left. And they said to me, "Do you want to do the consumer reporting?" And I said, "No. There's no way I could fill Paula's shoes." And they said, "Give it a shot, and if you don't like it, no hard feelings, but just give it a shot." I have to tell you, I just loved it immediately because the ability to really help people. The big joke is, well, it's not brain surgery. No, it is not. But we really sometimes can make one telephone call and help somebody who just otherwise doesn't have an alternative. And so that responsibility, that ability, that you can come in, it's all right. It's a little cooler out there. Oh, believe me, I know about a breeze. Did I mention 58? You with me on that? Yeah. I'd be glad to come back and do a health show for you.
There we go. I think we got you booked for next week on that.
Excellent, no problem. I've loved it ever since, and people call and, they say, "What am I going to do? Is this a scam? Is this," and to be able to say to people, "Yes, that's a scam. Do not give them any money." To be able to, actually really feel like we've had an effect is just a remarkable, remarkable responsibility and great. And I'm very grateful for having that opportunity. And I work with a producer, and we have Team 5 Investigates now. Does this look at all familiar? You see that? They said, they've taken the picture, we're all standing, and they said, "Susan, fold your arms." I said, "Why?" They said, "Fold your arms, trust us." So I folded, and in that picture, don't I just look like I know what I'm talking about? Just because I folded my arms. They probably would have done better to say, "Just shut your mouth." So we do Team 5 Investigates, and I have a producer, and we get 90% of our stories, actually 99% of our stories, from you, from people who have problems or people who have questions, who call us and say, "Can you help me with such and such?" We start looking into something, and we realize it's a scam or that it's a bigger story. I'm going to tell you a little secret right now. We're working on a couple of things. We're about to go on the air and tell you who makes some of the private label foods that you see in Star Market and Shaw's and Stop and Shop and Roach Brothers. And you may be surprised by some of that. And I would give you the answers right now, but I heard that there are 2 reporters here from the newspaper. Yeah, so wouldn't that just be great? My boss said, "Susan, great, here's your story in the Metro West." But that story came out of people calling me and saying, it all started with downsizing. People called and said, "My ice cream container doesn't seem to be as big as it was." Well, guess what? Yeah. And they being the manufacturers, are very clever about it. Because, if you think about it, you never see the big sign that says, "Great smaller package." Right? Oh no. It's always new improved this or new improved that or special sale or blah, blah, blah. But I'm waiting until they say, "Try this, it's less for your money." Not going to happen. So that's how we get our stories. And like I said, it's very gratifying. And I work for an amazing company. Now, you would think I would say that after so many years working for Channel 5 and Hearst Broadcasting. But I have something to back that up other than just blind pride. First of all, the fact that I've even been there for 30 years. I am the oldest living anchor woman in America. Is what I believe. And so that tells you something. But the fact that they let me do stories about anything that we feel is important to consumers. Doesn't matter if they're advertisers. I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. But what's really important is if somebody is doing something wrong to harm consumers in any way, and I uncover it, they let me go public with it. We have gone after Home Depot. We have gone after Sears most recently. We have gone after Toyota trucks. We have really kept it very separate from advertising. It doesn't matter how much money they spend on the station. If they are doing something wrong, they're going to see themselves on the 6 o'clock and the 11 o'clock news. And it's that simple. And the other reason that Channel 5 is very special is that, you know, I can go on and on and on and name names, you know, from our president and general manager, Bill Fine, to Mike Lynch, to Dickey, to me, to Jack Carr. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. We are all from here. You know, we didn't come to Channel 5 as a stepping stone to move on to a bigger market. We're all from here. We have some institutional knowledge. We know it is Stoughton and not Stufton. I know it's okay to spell Marlborough without the GH. You know, I mean, and those things matter. Those things are all, they make a difference. And at Channel 5, we appreciate the fact that people expect that from us. And we spend every day, you know, earlier we were doing, Christine and I were doing an interview, and she asked me, it was a very good question actually. I want all your bosses to know. It was it was a good interview. I hope people get a chance to see it on cable. Not my mother, but everybody else. Many of you may know my mother actually. If you ever shopped at Dish and Dat in Natick, yeah, you knew my mother. And how do you know she's my mother? Because she tells you. The store is out of business, but she's still hawking the line up and down the street. You know, it's absolutely funny. You know, you used to walk into the store and she would say, "Oh, are you here for dishes? Oh, you gonna eat dinner while you watch the 6 o'clock news?" My daughter, Susan Wornick. And she had absolutely no problem telling complete strangers things she wanted me to know that should have been sort of intimate and private. I could walk down the street anywhere, and somebody would come up to me and say, "Oh, excuse me, you Susan Wornick?" And I'd say, "Yes, I am." "Cut your hair, your mother hates it." So, but that's also great. Now, you know, so those of you, actually those of you who, a couple of people were nice enough earlier to ask about my mom. She's still living in Framingham. She's great. She would have been here tonight, actually, had she been invited. That's not true. It's not true. She plays mahjong on Wednesday nights. So oh yeah, so yeah, it's important. It's very important. Last time I got married, I said, "Mom, I'm getting married." She said, "Again?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, I hope it's not Wednesday." But anyway, I digress. I get off on these tangents. I don't even know how it happens, but I just start blah, blah, blah. But you asked me a very good question, and I don't really remember now what it was. But I remember at the time, it was a really good question. We talked about commitment, and you asked me about the commitment, and is Channel 5, you know, don't you try to be first, and don't you always try to get on the air first? And the truth of the matter is, no, we don't. We try to get it right. Now, happily, we have such a great team of reporters that oftentimes we do get on first. But I will never stand here and say to you, it's the most important thing that we get it to you first, because it's never going to be. It is always going to be more important to us that we get it right. And if we don't, that, as far as we're concerned, is just something that we don't get over easily. You know, first, fast, factual. We are factual, fast on the air. And that's something that we hope that everybody respects about us. So that if you see something on Channel 5, you absolutely know you can go with it. And for the Team 5 Investigates, that's our mandate, to get you information and investigative information about things that, you know, otherwise you probably would not have an opportunity to get. Did you want to ask me anything else you want me to?
I guess the only other thing that I personally would want to touch base on is when I had told my parents I was going to school for journalism. My mom is a huge Channel 5 nerd, so just put that out there right away. And she would remind me, don't lose your morals when you're doing the news. And definitely, she would always she actually mentioned you for the case you had in the 80s when you defended your source and you wouldn't reveal the source. So I guess, I'm sure most people know about that here, but maybe you just kind of touch on that a little bit and what kept you not caving in, and like what just kind of kept you going and holding up that standard to.
Thank you for mentioning that. It's something that I'm very proud of, and it was so long ago that I sometimes do forget about talking about it. It was back in the mid-'80s, and I was sentenced to jail. I was sentenced to 90 days at what was then called MCI Framingham for protecting a source. The story was about Revere police officers, 6 of them, went to the store in a Northgate shopping center, called to a breaking and entering alarm. And when they got there, they looted the store. They backed up 3 cruisers, trunks open, and the way the story went, were seen with big barrels taking stuff from the store, putting it into the trunks of the cruisers. The way I got onto the story was because I had a very good source at the state police. And the state police were, in fact, investigating the allegations against the Revere police officers. So I started doing stories about the state police investigation into the Revere cops. I got off the air one day at 6 o'clock, and at that point, I was the only reporter in town who was doing the stories. The other stations had not yet picked up on it. I get off the air, 6 o'clock, I get a call in the newsroom. A guy says to me, "I just saw your report." He says, "What was the name of the state trooper you mentioned?" So I gave him the name of the trooper's, the state police investigator in charge. And I said, "Why do you want him?" And he said, "Well, I was there that night and I saw what happened." I said, "Really? Well, what'd you see?" So he proceeds to tell me. I saw the cruisers backed up, I saw the trunks open, I saw the officers, and he saw everything. And I knew he was legitimate because he saw things. He told me that he saw things that I knew to be true, but had not yet myself reported. So I said, "Wow, this is really important information. Would you do an interview with me?" And he said, "Absolutely not. I'm from Revere. Everybody in Revere knows me. If I go on camera in Revere..." Exactly. You know, I don't need that. I don't need to be worried about living in Revere. I don't know what the police would do, blah, blah, blah. So I said, "I get that. How about we'll do it anonymously? Nobody ever has to know your name." You know, and I'm summing this up very quickly tonight, but in fact, I talked to him on the phone for well over an hour that night and finally convinced him to do a back-to-camera interview. I went out with a photographer. I met him. We put him in a big Channel 5 jacket with a big collar. We put the collar up. We put his back to the camera, and we did the interview. People have said to me, "How did you know he was legitimate?" Well, very simply. He said he was at the Northgate Shopping Center. I said, "Really, 2 o'clock in the morning, what were you doing there?" "I was at the ATM, which was then a Bay Bank." "Really?" I said, "Well, can you prove it?" He's, "Well, I have my receipt for my deposit." If you think about it, the deposit has the date, the time, the location, and the amount. It doesn't have your name, though. So I still wasn't sure who he was. So I asked him to get me his bank statement. He got me his bank statement, and with that, I was able to cross-reference that he was who he said he was, because his name was on the statement with his address, and it had the transaction at the place he said, when he said. So I knew he was who he said he was, and that he was where he said he was when he said he was there. And that was why I knew he was legitimate. We put the interview on the 11 o'clock news that night. Now keep in mind, this man had initially called me because he wanted the name of the state trooper. And I said to him, "So you're going to call the trooper in the morning?" He said, "Absolutely." I said, "You're going to tell him everything that you told me?" He said, "Absolutely." And he did. The next morning, he called Lieutenant Bob Bitter at the state police. And when he got off the phone with the lieutenant called me. And he said, "Your guy called." And I said, "Was he helpful?" He said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Did he have good information?" He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Susan, I have only one question." I said, "What's that?" He said, "What's his name?" And I said, "Well, didn't he tell you?" And he said, "No." He said that you knew and you were the only one because he wants to be anonymous. And that's the first indication I had that I might have a little trouble down the road. Because I had promised this man anonymity, and it wasn't just selective anonymity. I had promised him across the board. I was not going to reveal his identity, and I didn't. And so what happened was, as the state police needed this man's information, they would call me, I'd call him, and he would call them. And so it went for about 3 months. And eventually, when they felt that they had enough information for an indictment, they wanted to bring all this information before a grand jury, but they needed this man's testimony. But they couldn't subpoena him because they didn't know his name. But I did, so they subpoenaed me. Brought me before the grand jury, ordered me to divulge his name. I refused. They brought me before a judge. I refused. The judge sentenced me to jail. And Channel 5 supported me completely and totally. All the legal fees, all the representation, everything. And on the very same day that I was sentenced, we appealed. And we brought it up through the state appellate process, and late that afternoon argued before a single justice of the state Supreme Court, who took it under advisement, and in the meantime sent me home, stayed the sentence. And during this time, it was big news in the newspapers and on the radio and television, that, here we are with the mid-1980s and they're talking about sending a reporter to jail. I mean, that was just amazing in the city of Boston. And the witness, who I was protecting, heard and saw all of the news reports, and he felt so awful that he was the reason that I was going to jail. He came forward. He identified himself. He testified before the grand jury, and the case against me was dropped. People have said to me repeatedly, would you do it again? Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to. Especially what I do now. If I didn't have great sources on my stories, I mean, even the food story that I talked to you about before, I have sources from inside the industry who are telling me who's doing what. If I did not have those sources, I would not have the stories. If I did not have the stories, I would not be able to protect you. If I couldn't protect you, what good would my job be? So it's really important to let a source know that under any circumstances, you are going to protect that person. Now, what is different from back in the 1980s is I will say to my source now, listen, what could happen ostensibly is that police may ask me who you are, and I'm not going to say, and they may sentence me to jail. Are you prepared to let me go to jail? You would be amazed at how many people are ready to let me go to jail. But that is what's different. Full disclosure now. No, seriously.
They would let you go.
Absolutely. Yeah, truly. Because that man, his name is Scott Cohen. I'm still in touch with him. It's public now. I didn't think I'd ever be able to say it out loud, but I have since many times. And he's very, of course, and as well as he should be, proud of what he did. But he felt terrible, came forward, testified. But if you were to talk to him, if Scott was here with us today, and you said to him, would you do it again? I think he might say he would not. Because after he came forward, then his life sort of fell apart. His wife didn't agree with him, his wife at the time, that was what he should have done. They eventually felt they had to move. They did. They moved to Florida. Their marriage broke up. I mean, of course, there are always a number of reasons. But, so he might tell you he would never do it again. So now it's about full disclosure. It's about telling people this could happen. Hopefully it never will, but it could. And we're all, not just me, any solid journalist, whether it's the Middlesex News, whether it's your cable station, radio, any journalist would tell you the same thing if he or she were standing here. You do what you have to do to protect a source. Sourcing is what it's all about.
Definitely.
Am I done?
I think so. I think
No.
we can.
You have questions? Yes,
I was gonna
sir.
say, open it up to
in the
questions.
back.
When you got onto that case and you knew you were in trouble, how fast did you get to Channel 5 and tip them off that this was coming up?
You mean that I was going to be found in contempt? Or what?
You knew about that long before you knew you were going to be in contempt. How
You-
soon did you tip them off that?
Oh, that there could be a problem? Oh, immediately. The next morning when I got a call from that state police lieutenant, I knew instantly. I knew instantly. Because I knew they were very serious. The state police was very serious about their investigation. And I knew this guy had everything they needed. And I knew he wanted to be anonymous. And I knew they wanted to know who he was. And I knew they were going to press me for it. What was interesting, though, at the time, Newman Flanagan was the district attorney in Suffolk County. He's the one who prosecuted me. So I very quickly went to my bosses and said, we're going to have a problem. There's a potential here. So we were all aware that this could happen, but there was never any conversation about, well, what if, or what should we do? I mean, it was just, let's see what happens. So from the very beginning. But what it was interesting to me is that Newman Flanagan, who prosecuted me, knew that the state police had to call me at home in Sudbury. They knew that I would then be calling Scott in Revere.
Also, they could tap your phone.
They could have pulled my phone records, because it was a long-distance call, to find out what number I was calling. And they never did. And I, of course, couldn't say, hello, get my phone record. And after the fact, I said to Newman, how come you guys didn't pull my phone records? You knew what was going on. You knew he was in Revere. You knew where I lived. And he said to me, we thought that that would be a violation of your privacy. Yeah, and, but I always thought that that was sort of fascinating. But it's a good question, but we did know pretty early on. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
I worked well over here, but at the time I worked at the SJC.
Oh,
And in fact, I still do. And it really changed me that day, what you did.
thank you.
Because I thought, Jesus, what a backbone. What a backbone.
Thank you.
You know, really, it truly, I grew up.
Thank you.
that day.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I have to tell you, I was scared to death. I really was scared to death. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. You know, Bob LaBelle and I were married at the time. Bob LaBelle, you may remember him.
I actually did Bay State games with Bob before, so
Nice guy, used to do sports at Channel 4. No, he's a great guy. He is a great guy, and he and I are still very, very close friends. If we weren't, I wouldn't be, if I was not close with he and his wife, Suzanne, I wouldn't be able to make jokes about it, obviously. But he and I were married at the time, and he was a tremendous, support system for me. As a matter of fact, he used to make jokes about the fact that I was sentenced to jail. He was quoted as saying, the first sale at Bloomingdale's and she'll sing like a bird. And then he told somebody else, I didn't mind going to MCI Framingham because it was close to Loman's. You know, I mean, at the time I had a little trouble with the humor, but I don't even remember what was the question. But oh no, it wasn't a question at all, it was a statement, and I thank you very much for it. Despite all the support I had from the station and from Bobby, I was scared to death. I did not want to go to jail. I mean, I am so lucky, you know, at that point in time I was, 36 years old, 35, 36 years old, and I had never been sick. I mean, I had never been laid up. My point being, I had never been confined. And here, my freedom was going to be taken away from me, and that's what frightened me the most. I was not worried about what was going to happen to me in jail. I mean, nothing was going to happen to me in jail because they knew that the minute I got out of jail, I would do stories about what was going on in jail. So that didn't concern me at all. But I truly was afraid for that loss, that loss of freedom. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a silly question?
There is no silly question. I've made a career on that.
Bad guys?
Pardon me?
Did they catch the bad guys?
You know, they did. They did and they didn't. It was somewhat satisfying and yet not. One police officer did go to jail. He went to jail for perjury, for lying to the grand jury. Charges against other officers eventually were dropped, though, because another witness, not mine, but another witness who worked as an MBTA police officer at the time, his testimony was ruled as inadmissible, and he was the corroborating testimony. So eventually, only one officer actually went to jail, but a couple others were fired, and I'm happy to tell you it did have a lasting impact on the Revere Police Department. But thank you for asking. Yes, ma'am.
If I may change the subject.
Please.
About 20 years ago, you came out here and emceed a fashion show.
I remember that, and I remember
Two
you.
of the models in it were male models, one being Steve LeDuc, who was a city councilor, probably 22 years old.
Oh, I remember
and
that.
was Mayor Michael Hogan,
I remember.
probably 27 or 8.
Yeah.
And you made some remark about Steve, and then when Mayor Hogan came out, you said, wait a minute, Mayor, isn't that your first name? And he said, no, it's Mayor Michael. You said, what is this, a city run by kids?
Hard to believe I'd say that now that you know me a little better, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Can I change the subject?
Sure.
I have a topic that I'd like to talk to you about outside the forum in relation to consumer advocacy.
Mhm.
So how do I get in touch with you?
I'm actually very accessible. I'm online. If I am in the station, then you can be sure that my email is on, and it's very easy. It's swornick, SWORNICK, at Hearst, HEARST.com. There are some days when I get so many emails that I don't get to see them all, but I pride myself on answering all the emails I get, that I see, that I can. So if I do not respond to you within 2 days, email me again because it means I didn't see it. That's the best way to get in touch with me.
Because I think you'll definitely find the story very interesting and probably useful.
Good. I'd love to hear it.
So
Because even if we don't do stories, we try to help people.
Well,
And even
that's
if we
what you're
don't have an
saying,
answer,
well.
we try to point them in the direction of who might have the answer.
Okay, well, I think you'll find it, just remember, that my email is partially dream as part of mac.com, so when you do see the email, I don't know if I put the subject of tonight, so you'll know where it's
Yeah,
coming
put from Marlborough or something like that, because I got to be honest, if I see dream something in your,
Yeah, I think it's a.
I'm thinking, why didn't our spam filter get this?
That's why I'm telling you, because I really figured that you would say that. It actually may happen.
Good.
That if it's spammed, but if not, then I'll find some other, I'll do.
Just
it
call
in
the station and
library.
ask for me. No, seriously, if you just call the station and ask for me, you also will get to me.
Okay.
Hopefully someone will answer who knows me.
And then I can
may have
say,
to give a
I
brief-
met her,
yeah.
at such and such, and I need to talk to her. Great.
Brief
Thank you.
physical description, but yes, ma'am.
Beautiful,
Oh,
blonde,
thank you,
know,
thank you.
Nice nails.
Yeah, signature nails and jewelry. Yes.
Married to, Mr.
Let's not go down that list. We're running out of time. Yes. Yes.
Making your transition from radio to television, was it difficult getting in front of the camera and sort of getting used to talking to a machine and versus kind of being over the air? Were you nervous at all about it?
You know, I wasn't nervous because I loved radio. And when I was in radio, you could be a one-person radio station from anywhere in the world, as long as you had a telephone. Because all you'd have to do is call into the station, and they could get you on the air in a matter of seconds, as I described before with the World Airways crash. So when I started doing part-time work on television, it was sort of like a kick. It was just something different, and I never in a million years thought that it was going to turn out to be my first and full-time love. So I really wasn't all that nervous because I had nothing to lose. I was just doing it because I enjoyed doing it, and it seemed like a great opportunity. It wasn't until after I was hired full-time that I thought, what have I done? You know, I mean, because I'm obviously exaggerating, but I did have much more respect for television after I was doing it for a while. It really became more of an awesome responsibility than radio. Because radio, the average report is about 35, 40 seconds, you know, and you're on and you're off, and you're on and you're off, and you know, you don't have as much opportunity, frankly, to screw up and everybody watching you. And again, this is where my mother comes in, you know. I have to tell you, I can do what I think is the most amazing investigative report. I am so proud of myself. My mother does not miss anything. I get off the air, I walk into the newsroom, they say, Susan, your mother's on the phone. And I think, this is great. I love this. You know, and I pick up the phone and I say, hi, Mom. And she says, you like your hair like that? And I say, no, Mom, I'm just trying to piss you off. So to answer your question, I suddenly realized that it was a lot more public than, but a lot of people will ask me from time to time, because, you know, I've been around for so long, grew up in Natick. I know a lot of people, you know, and even people that I don't know me and recognize the face. And they will say to me, you know, what's it like being out all the time and you have no real privacy? It's wonderful. I have to tell you, it really is. It is like having instant friends. People are wonderful. People are so nice. You know, if I really want to have a nice time on a Saturday, I'll go to Super Stop and Shop and just walk up and down the aisles. Seriously, I go to the new Roche Brothers in Wellesley just to see who I bump into. So it certainly added a different element to my life, this public persona. But I have loved it from the day I started, and I just feel, and I can't. You know, you're going to think this is just sort of sappy and silly, but I just can't tell you how lucky I feel. I work for a great place where I grew up with people I love. I mean, it's an awesome opportunity. And then not a day goes by that I don't say, you know, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, in the back, sir.
Yeah, you still work with the women in a prison. I read a story once where you did an investigation and you volunteered your time.
Right. It was actually not women in prison so much as it was young women in the custody of the Department of Youth Services. And I do in a different way now. Times have changed, and back in those days, in the 90s, the State Department of Youth Services had no problem allowing a reporter into the lockups. And I did do that twice a week for several years, actually, where I went into a couple of the different lockups, and we would have off-the-record rap sessions. That's all it was. And it was born out of me doing a story about teenage prostitution on the streets of Boston. And back in those days, everybody said, there's no teenage prostitution. What are you talking about? And we went out and we actually found out it was a huge problem. And I met some young women who just broke my heart. And after we were through doing the stories, I thought, well, now what? So now I've done the stories, now what? So I went to the Department of Youth Services, and much to their credit, you know, I said, what can I do? Use me. How can I help? You know, I can be a role model. And really, much to their credit, it was a different time, like I said, but they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go in, and I want to work with the girls. And they let me for several years. So times have changed, and, you know, it's not that easy anymore because there's all kinds of opportunities for litigation and privacy, right, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I don't do that. But I am still involved with the RFK Action Corps, which ran the programs that I used to go into back in the 90s. And they're an unbelievable group named after Robert F. Kennedy. And it's sort of an umbrella group that raises money for programs for which there, these days especially, are diminishing budgets for kids. So I do it in a different way. It's not, frankly, quite as rewarding as having that hands-on, but thank you for mentioning it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see Natalie, and was that a very sad time?
You know, it was such a mixed bag of emotions. Yes, we all still see Natalie. Natalie is married. You'll be seeing her on the air again. You know, we're going to be using her in different ways for different things. She wanted to take a break. But it was sad because it was sort of the end of an era, certainly. But we were thrilled for her because she was doing something she really, really wanted to do. And she did, by the way. Let there be absolutely no mistake about this. That was Natalie's decision. Natalie'd still be doing the 6 o'clock news on Channel 5 if Natalie wanted to. But she just said it's time for something else. And we were thrilled for her to be able to have the confidence to move on. So it was a real mixed bag. But I'll be sure to tell her that you asked about that, and she always says to me, nobody remembers me anymore. And I say, you're right. They're all watching me now. She'll be happy to know that you.
Cried that last broadcast. I cried.
Oh, well, I hope you got over it watching the midday. No, I know we all did. Sure, I mean, of course. And then she came out into the newsroom, and she got a standing ovation. I mean, we were all there because we had a little party right afterwards. And at the time, she promised to give me her suits. Then wouldn't. No, but it was a very melancholic and, like I said, a mixed bag. Yes?
You know, there's a lot of news choices for people now on TV with cable and stuff.
Yes.
A lot of different channels. And one thing that my husband and I always talk about is you turn to all these different channels and you see all these women that look like models on the news. And he always says, do you think they hired her for her talent? I mean, do you think people today are hired for their talent, or are they hired because they test well with focus groups?
Are there any questions? As much as I would love to talk for all of the stations, I can't. And I can only encourage you to make up your own mind after checking things out. But I can't talk for Channel 5. And I can challenge you to find one person on Channel 5 who is not as bright, as quick, has as much depth and personality as they do appearance. And we're very proud of that. So I would tell you that on Channel 5 there has never been a person, to my knowledge, who was hired simply because of how they looked. Except, of course, me.
Especially when you did the weather forecast.
But it's a good question. I mean, and it's something that, we all grapple with. And like I said, I would not, I would encourage you to ask the other television stations. But I promise you that It's not happening at 5. Yes.
Susan, you have it all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Personality.
Thank
She
you.
does.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Now that they're filming more movies in the Boston area.
Yes.
Have any of the celebrities had a chance to meet you?
Or have you them?
Thank you. You know, we have had a couple of opportunities long before they started filming all of it. Am I done now? You know, when they come to the podium, then you know you're done. I know, it's actually me because I'm the one who said that I had to leave by, I get up early, I'm up by 4, and tomorrow morning, especially with the Celtics parade, you know, we have to be at the station before, you'll be getting home and I'm going to be at the station. And and I appreciate you being sensitive to that. But many years ago, we used to do the Good Day Show on Channel 5. And so long before they started, you know, filming all of these major motion pictures, people would be coming by to perform at various venues, and they would always stop at the station. And so we've always been lucky in that we've had an opportunity to have some of the big names and the big celebrities come through. And I've had a great opportunity meeting many of them. And I know that from some of the people I've met in my life, who I still remember, that whether or not I can point to one particular incident, episode, or fact, that they have made a difference in my life, and I'd like to think that the experience was the same. I hope. Yes? Hi.
What about the impact that the internet is having on television? We see that a lot of the younger viewers aren't watching TV. They're not reading newspapers. Their primary source is the internet, and as we know, a lot of the initial reports of the internet generally lack facts, and I'm just interested as to what you see what will happen in the future.
Did y'all hear the question? No, the question was, how did you get to be such a great reporter? No, the question was great. It was a great question, and it's with the advent of the internet, you know, how is that affecting broadcast journalism? And it is. There's no question it is, because so many people of all generations, frankly, are going right to. I found myself doing it. Honest to God, this morning. I have to admit this. I was up very early, as I said. The newspaper had not yet arrived, and I wanted to see. I knew how on television, I knew how we were all talking about the Celtics, but I wanted to see how the newspapers were doing it, and I went right to the computer. You know, and a lot of people do that. So what we're really hoping is that they don't just do that, that they stay. But it is a problem, and I'll tell you why it's a problem. There are things now that can be so easily confused, and it's not just online. It's also on television. You know, you click around now. It used to be that the major networks, there were 3 of them, and they all had great news shows, you know, and you knew that if you were watching 60 Minutes, that was fact. And you knew that if they were telling you something, it was real. And then all of a sudden there was Inside Edition. And a lot of people thought, well, if that's on television and if that's on a major network, that must also be fact. You know, and then the lines started to blur. And we're seeing that again with the internet because, you know, I do a blog. The big thing now on the internet is a blog. I promise you, if I put something in my blog, if it's an opinion, I will tell you if it's an opinion. If it's a fact and something that has happened to me, I will tell you that. But so often, the people who are blogging are just writing whatever they want to. I mean, I'm not political, but I am going to take this moment in these last few minutes to get on my high horse and on my soapbox for a minute. This is a very important election, a very important presidential election for so many reasons, and we all come at it with our different priorities. But there's one thing I want you to think about that perhaps you haven't. The next president of this country is going to have the opportunity to name Supreme Court justices. And ultimately, our Constitution is going to be redefined by the United States Supreme Court because so many of the constitutional rights that we have are outdated. Whether you want to talk about freedom of the press and what happened to me back, you know, in the mid-'80s, and if you want to talk about privacy, it doesn't matter. When that Constitution was written, great document, please don't misunderstand me, I respect it with every bone in my body, but it's outdated. Our forefathers did not know there was going to be an internet. And so many important things need to be checked. They need to be redefined. They need to be closely looked at. And the Supreme Court is going to do that. So as you look at these candidates coming up in November, one of the things I think is so important is to understand how closely aligned you are with them, not about oil exploration, not about abortion, not about the economy, not about the war in Iraq. I'm not saying not just those things, not only those things. How closely aligned are you morally with them? How do they feel about the things that you feel are important to us as Americans? And really spend some time thinking about that. Because I really believe that ultimately we probably won't live to see it. And I say this to a lot of aspiring journalists. You asked me earlier, what advice do I give them? Get into law. Get into law, because so many things are going to need to be redefined. And hopefully, and it will be a good thing, no question about that. And the only other thing that I want to leave you with in the last few minutes that I have here, please don't ever underestimate how important you are to us. Our viewers are crucial. You are our lifeblood. If it was not for you, and this is going to sound odd, but if it wasn't for you and your problems, where would I be? I want to know if you have issues. I want to try to help you if I can. At Channel 5, we really are committed to being a public service. Oh yeah, there's a couple of offices in the building where they're trying to make a few bucks as well, and you know, we all know we're still a for-profit institution. But when I tell you that we are completely committed to solid journalism, please believe me. And thank you for your attention tonight. Thank you for inviting me. And just please